Well, welcome. I'm the Reverend Adrienne Cook, and I am speaking to you today on the topic of love from the Centers of Intelligence in the Enneagram. And today is our first interview with a heart type. If you've been with us for the last few weeks, you know that we went through numbers 7, 6, and 5, which are the head types. And now we're moving to 4, the romantic, the melancholic, the individualist. These are some of the ways that 4s have been categorized with one word, but today we're going to learn a fuller picture of what a 4 can look like through 2 of our guests. We have with us Lois and Michelle, and just in a little bit, they're going to introduce themselves. But before we do that, let's frame a little bit of the conversation through the Christian lens of love with 2 really common passages that are often associated with love, and maybe set some expectations for us about what love looks like.
Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not know love does not know God, because God is love.
Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails.
Now, these last few sessions, I've been trying to give a summary of that, but I'm going to just leave it now that we're into the heart types. And we're going to explore what love looks like from the heart. And so first, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, sharing a few thoughts from a teacher of mine, Peter O'Hanrahan, who presented at the International Enneagram Association Conference in January of this year on the topic of love in the 3 centers. And he has something to say about the heart center. He tells us that as human beings, we have a limbic system, which governs our emotions and supports our bonding with one another, our attachments with partners and friends, with children, with family members. Now, most of us have strong emotional responses toward people we care about. We're capable of empathy, compassion, devotion. We can often tell when someone is listening to us and empathizing with their heart. We can be moved by the joy and the suffering of others. With a strong enough empathy function, we may even feel concern for a stranger who's in trouble. Now, scientifically speaking about all of this, mirror neurons, which I know nothing about other than what Peter tells me, explain how we can experience the physical or emotional reaction of another person in our own body when these neurons fire. So somebody else's emotional experience that we feel in our body because of the way these neurons fire. The trick with loving from the heart is that emotions can feel so strong in one moment, like that experience of empathy, and then so limp the next. If we were only to love with our feelings, what would happen when our feelings change? How does love change? Does love change? Does our understanding of love change? Our perception of love change? There is a saying that love brings up everything unlike love, meaning that when we open our hearts in a close relationship, we also open the door to any unworked or repressed feelings from our past. When our feelings are blamed on the other person, there's big trouble often in relationships. So let's go macro for a second here, even further macro in our culture. In American culture, we expect to be moved and opened up by falling in love. But when it comes down to it, how much romance do we seek and how much can we really handle? The media is full of stories about charismatic people who meet their soulmate, fall in love, and then not long after are in the throes of an acrimonious divorce, as well as stories of high school sweethearts who today are celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. Romantic love for the majority of people in the world is a relatively new development in human history. The concept of romantic love took a big leap with the Romantic poets of the late medieval and Renaissance periods, but in that poetry, the best object of one's romantic love was always someone unattainable. Always someone unattainable. Someone to be idealized from a distance, not someone you sought to take to bed that night. Now, some totalitarian states discourage romantic love between individuals, directing people to give their love to the motherland or supreme leader as an embodiment of a nation. Christian scripture can even be understood to discourage romantic, erotic love, pointing to a higher spiritual agape love, shared only with God, intellectualized by people. We saw a little bit of this. We explored a little bit of this with the head types the last few weeks. And in the medieval church, eros and agape mingled in the poetry and the prayer of the mystics, taking after the Song of Solomon, love poetry in Hebrew scripture. So all of that gives us some context to these questions. If romance provides the fuel for the fire of the heart center, but the biochemical rush of romantic love wears off over time, can romance be reignited? Can it mature into something stable and committed? Can we keep our hearts open to a partner through times of disappointment and difficulty? These are questions that all of us ask at some point. And the Enneagram tells us that this takes work in our type structure. And up on the screen, you can see all of the 9 types here. We are just moving from that thinking triad to the feeling triad. Now, biologically, these chemicals I was just talking about involved in the feeling of romance wear off within a year or two. Some of the statistics show us. And then endorphins come into play in our bodies. They help create feelings of safety and security, a comfortable attachment. And love moves from a state of excitement to a state of calm. And this movement from excitement to calm is part of type 4's movement in the Enneagram, a movement from a vice of what is called envy toward a virtue named equanimity. But I'm not the best source of information on love through the lens of type 4. In this conversation, that's certainly Lois and Michelle. So I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And if you would, please share how you got connected to this interview with Trinity folks and the Episcopal Church, and also share how you know that you're a type 4. And either of you can feel free to hop right in.
I started attending Trinity Cathedral about maybe 3 years ago. Prior to that, I was raised Catholic. And as my boys got older, around 10, and I think Daniel, my youngest, was around 7, I just started to think about my feelings about church and religion and what I would want for my boys and what I truly believe in my heart, and decided that the Episcopal faith was the truest version of what I felt inside. And so that's what brought me there. I was also attracted to the ritual that was similar to what I experienced in my faith tradition growing up. I first learned about the Enneagram in college, and then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I retook the READY, is that how you say it?
Mm-hmm.
The indicator, the Enneagram type indicator. and just to see if anything changed over time, and I'm still 4. um, so that's kind of and I've always just been interested in the Enneagram and other personality indicators, and learning about how my type interacts with other types around me. Like, I wanted my husband at the time to take it so we could learn about each other, and learn about the strengths and weaknesses. And they were both pretty right on.
Mm.
Were those all the questions?
Well, I have to say, there's some 4 themes pop up right away. You were really diving into your heart to figure out what was your most authentic experience of spirituality, and choosing the Episcopal Church to connect that way. Desiring to use the Enneagram, not just for self-reflection, but to connect you with a beloved. I'm curious, were there any key words or anything like that, where as you were taking these tests and you got the feedback on what your type was, where you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds like me?
Yeah, I think the first one that pops into my head is the sensitivity. I've always been highly sensitive, quiet, introspective, imaginative, self-expressive, passionate about my ideas, I believe, although I don't always share them. I need to be in a safe space to share them. But those are the ones that pop out. Oh, moody. I only did the positive ones. Definitely identify with moodiness and just big waves of emotions that I've had to learn how to deal with over time.
Thank you. I've often heard 4s describe the emotional landscape in terms of using water metaphors like that. I don't know if that's there are many kinds of waves, but when you said wave, I thought of, a deep ocean.
Not only like the visual of the wave, but also the temperature changes when you're in water. Like cold to the warm. Like I just feel like as I go in and out of spaces, sometimes I get a sense of that. Whether it's a space or an inside space, an outside space or an inside space. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful analogy. Thank you. That did answer the questions, Michelle. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Lois, how about you? What's your connection, and how do you know?
So my husband, Richard Israel, who you interviewed for the 6s sometime back, when he retired as one of the priests at St. Paul's, Cleveland Heights, began worshiping at Trinity. And I am also a clergywoman. I'm a Presbyterian clergy person. So when I wasn't on duty, I would come to Trinity with him. So we have that. And he continues to worship and participate in worship remotely. He's very connected. I first learned about the Enneagram from a friend. I don't even remember. It seemed like almost an offhand conversation, but it was life-changing when she said, you should really look at David Daniel and Virginia Price's Essential Enneagram. It's just, and I love it. I mean, I recommend it to people all the time. I say this is the quick and dirty way to do it. It's in and out. It's very nice little short paragraphs about this describes your type and here are the things you want to work on. And I have found it very useful. And since then, I've gone on to do retreats and to read just everything I can get my hands on. So speaking of the Essential Enneagram, one of those little blurbs was that we find love, meaning, and fulfillment through self-expression and deep connection. And that is, I really resonated to that at the risk of sounding arrogant, I've always liked to go deep. Not that other people don't, but I go very deep. And I enjoy relationships in which I can go deep. I have lots and lots and lots of acquaintances, but the ones that really matter to me are the ones where I can go very, very deep. Certainly, as Michelle said, I've had to learn to deal with the waves of emotion. And again, from the Essential Enneagram, one of the recommendations is to pursue a steady course of action despite the waves of emotion. And that's been something that really I resonated with. Okay, just stay steady. Dealing with melancholy. And I would say, and I've struggled, I'll be very honest, I've gone back and forth because I have a very strong 3-wing. I have a lot of issues around achievement and being a high achiever. But what ultimately has nailed it for me is what 4s experience in terms of what is missing. and a sense of loneliness and a sense of abandonment. And for a lot of reasons related to family of origin issues, there always was that sort of sense of emptiness, and I'm different from others, and I'm kind of standing apart from others, despite the fact that people, I think if a lot of people knew that about me, they would just faint because they perceive me, and rightly so, as extremely warm. But there's still this inner loneliness or emptiness that I have come to grips with. So lots of resonance.
Yes. Thank you, Lois. That you actually just moved quite well into the slide that I've pulled up for each of the types for every interview, and to look at that that vice of the 4. This slide comes from the very first class that I taught in this series, which goes into some of the monastic 4th century connections to Enneagram work in the Christian tradition. So the logismoi are the little things, the little vices, the little cracks in the heart that the Enneagram posits shapes our personality structure, our ego structure. And so we talk about it in that tradition in terms of sin, but in the Enneagram generally, it's often referred to as a vice. That you all might have heard other terms as well. None are coming to mind, but I know there are other ways that people talk about what envy is for a 4. And I'd be curious to hear what you all both think of that word. A way that I've heard envy described for the type 4 is not so much of desiring something that someone else has, but that sense of inner scarcity and an external awareness of abundance. There's so much out there available, but I'm unable to have it or to be it or whatever. So some sense of inner scarcity. And that's what I heard in some of what you were saying, Lois. Does that resonate?
It does. I mean, thankfully, I feel like I have done so much work. Thank God for this tool. I've done so much work that it's not oppressing, like it used to, but it used to be that sense of self-pity or inner scarcity. And again, because of this wonderful tool, I feel that I have worked through a lot of that. But yeah, that was there for sure.
Well, I appreciate, you mentioned despite the waves of emotion that Michelle had sort of dove us into, that steady course is one of the paths that a 4 can stick to in order to find some movement toward the equanimity, the irony of that juxtaposition, I suppose, movement toward a kind of stillness.
I guess the pain is so bad when you're in that pity party and you're in that sense of scarcity. It's just like, I don't want to continue to live like this. That was the drive for I just really want to enjoy. I want to be joyful. I want to experience the abundance, and there's just not a lot of percentage in self-pity, and so the pain was the driver.
I feel the same way. I think of I think I've grown and developed through relationships. We talk about love. I definitely can identify with the idolizing other people in terms of, I think of before I got married, and, this person is on a pedestal, and things get tricky, and you were talking about, the initial stages of the relationship kind of slowed down, and there's a different kind of connection that you have to create. And so I think that, and then when you bring kids into the mix, it's so much harder. So I feel like my sense of loneliness and insecurity and sense of being special in some way, I really had to face then because of the pain that you brought up. I finally got to the point where I can't do this anymore. And through a variety of avenues, realized that I needed to find a way to calm the emotional storm. So I think for me, I'm looking at the bottom of spiritual apathy. I had to make myself continue with the things that help, like writing. I have to write almost every day in order to control my emotional insides. I need to get quiet and meditate. That was huge for me. And at first I was frustrated because I'm like, I'm doing all these things. Why do I have to meditate? But then as I continued with it, even though I didn't want to, I started to see how it calmed my insides and let me really find answers, really. Yeah.
Well, I know that conversations about uniqueness often flow from 4 conversations. And maybe the audience will learn more about why that might be in just a few moments. But my impulse right now, Michelle, is you're talking about needing to write, sift through your emotions. And I just thought, you know what, how shocking it is, having been doing this work for a number of years, seeing each type find the ways that they need to connect to self and move toward that path of freedom or integration or however you want to talk about it. But breaking out of, this, even this image on the screen, breaking out of the box of the ego and freeing yourself. And for all the differences between types, the journey is so similar. And 4s are so adept already at an internal audit of self that, I'm grateful to hear what Lois said, that, the Enneagram is a great tool as to give me that steadiness. Because you don't necessarily need help thinking about yourself and analyzing yourself and exploring your emotional landscape. You need no help with that. But the Enneagram can acknowledge these realities about you and then give some tools that can that can lead toward a kind of freedom that you need to find through that, in that, and keeping that and from it as well.
It's funny. I mean, Michelle, I'm with you. I write, like, I have this, journal upon journal upon journal. And my great fear is that if I die suddenly, people are going to find them and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, mom was a whack job. Like, what is this?
Every day.
Right? So much angst. Like, it could be a Woody Allen movie. But,
and then there's that part of me that's like, I'll just burn them. And I'm like, oh my God, no. Like,
you all, I'm dying because I lived with a 4 and I was house sitting for her once and some guests were coming and she said, oh, there's one thing you have to do with the guests coming because there's going to be days where you're not there. I need you to go into my room and get my journals and hide them at it. That's what she said. She was so terrified that anyone would see this authentic expression of self, like, in the journals. So I'm cracking up because that you both have this shared experience.
Well, I have to say, like, part of my discipline lately has been like, no, you're going to not write. You're not going to, like, say, dear God, help me, dear God, today. We're just going to, like, kind of chill a little bit on that today.
I had to start making gratitude lists eventually. So I always end with that, to write my 10 things.
So, Adrienne, going back to the issue of envy too, one of the things I used to say to my best friend was, I'm a serial idolizer. Like, I would,
I get it.
right?
Yeah, say more.
Like, oh my gosh, this person, this is it. I have found, the Messiah. This is the best friend I'll ever, this person, right? And it just became a funny image to me, like I'm a serial idolizer, right? And like there isn't that perfect person or love or situation or job. And I don't know if that's a 4 thing, but I think it might be, given the envy.
To me, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and it really plays into the defense mechanism for type 4, which is I think is one of the most interesting, unique defense mechanisms I've ever heard of, which is introjection. And that's not just me like, oh, 4s want to be unique. It's so interesting. Have you ever heard of this, introjection?
Tell me a little bit more about it.
So it involves that idealization piece, and it's in a present moment. The 4's capacity to sort of leave the emotional experience of the present, grab an icon of perfection from the past or a completely imagined one in the future, and live in the emotional experience of one of those projections from past or present, or sorry, from past or future, rather than stay in the emotion that's in the moment.
That describes me to a T.
So that's how, and these defense mechanisms are how the ego keeps its structure maintained. So as long as you keep doing that, the four will stay constrained.
Yes.
You will be the four.
I
And
think that's
so
why meditation helped me so much. Like I had to,
nailed it.
yeah.
Because what does it do? What does meditation force you to do? You can't live here or here.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You have to be in the present moment.
So dangerous to be in those other places for me. Like that's where I can either spin into melancholy or be totally unrealistic about what life is.
And because in reality, you're a human being, right? So you live in time. You actually cannot live in the past, and you cannot live in the future. You can only be here now, and mantra after mantra has been, adapted from be here now. But that is the work of every type, is to find out how to do that in a way that is meaningful to that ego structure.
And meditation also is allowing whatever is. So, right, so you might be having terrible hip pain. Your left hip is killing you while you're sitting in meditation. And you're noticing that. You're not fighting it, right? So you're, again, not idealizing and having, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's like, oh, my left hip really hurts. I noticed that.
Yeah, that's right. And the Enneagram tries to help us discern between the difference between an inner critic, which can be quite active in a type 4. 4 has that connection to 1, and it's a resource point that can take on positive and negatives from it. Most commonly the positives, but 4s know how to be internal critics and can have a strong internal critic. So the difference between the internal critic and the internal observer, and to non-judgmentally allow whatever is happening now to be, and to not try to escape it.
Right.
And that's very true for 4s, very true for every type, to have to figure out their version of that story. So something that I wanted to jump on, just that had flowed from the conversation, was it was, I think one of you used the word joy. But yes, I thought, do you remember the context in which you brought it up, Lois? It's escaping me now at the moment as well. We've had so much.
I want to feel it. I am very dedicated to feeling joy. I just, that's a major intention.
Well, so I had, pre this interview, the three of us were just chatting, and I made the comment how there were similar colors on the walls, at least through the video screen, for both of you. And at that point, I think you had talked about sort of the happiness of it or the joy of it in some way, Lois. And this is what I was thinking of was the connection to type 7 for the 4. And so it's not an obvious connection, right? If we look at this image, 4 has arrows that connect at 1 and at 2. And now in the traditional Enneagram, or I should say the present Enneagram structure we have, type 4, when they are in a place of security, take all of the resources of the emotional expressiveness, the depth of thought and self-analysis from type 4, and move it toward type 1 to what looks like reform from a 4. So the 4 takes inner resources and finds a way to make it for others and for the world and for their children. All these different, it externalizes all this internal work, externalizes, and seeds are planted for someone else to grow from them. And when a 4 is in a place of stress, all of those anxieties and fears about the lack of connection go into overdrive, and the 4 looks like the 2 who just wants to help whoever it is that they're most anxious about and be present and do all the things that the 4 would maybe normally hate doing. Like if you hate baking, well, now's the time to bake for the person that you're really trying to connect to. So those are some of my examples. And I'm sure both of you could wax on more about that, and there will be time for that. But what we don't see here is one of the original drawings from Evagrius Ponticus and those that studied his work, which were three enclosed triangles. So three triangles that look just like the triangle we see between 9, 6, and 3. So the original drawings connected 4 to 7 and to 1. And it wasn't about moving toward one angle as integration and the other toward disintegration. It was a path for a spiritual journey. And so some of the traditions that have been brought from those original drawings are that often when a 4 is moving into a deeper soul integration, they're often tapping into the energy of type 7. It's the invisible line in the Enneagram that's there. And when I saw the yellowish color, the first word that popped into my mind was joy. And the 7s are the enthusiasts, the epicures, eat, drink, and be merry. And I remember when I was in my Enneagram training, and we were learning how to do the typing process, to sit with somebody and help them type themselves. And we had to come up with a list of questions for each type. And I did this in a group with 2 other people, and we had come up with questions for all the types. And when my colleague started interviewing a person for a type 4, she was accidentally asking them the questions for type 7. And she started off with, tell me about joy. What makes you joyful? And the 4 sort of looked at like it was like a shock to the 4. And then these tears came from the 4. And the 4 said, I am so grateful that is the first question you asked me. And she just felt this, like, she said, that's the draw. That's my deepest desire for myself, is to be able to go there. And hardly anybody asks me that when we're talking about 4s. We move toward this melancholic bent. We move toward what 4s do so well, which is, those deeper, often associated with darker emotions at the bottom of the sea. But the lightness of joy, often comes, I think, after you've been through that journey from the depths. I'm thinking of a song quotation that's something, you've all heard something like it before, that once you hit the rock bottom, that's when you begin to breathe. And so this idea of a lightness or a breath coming after you've hit your lowest point. And to me, that's the kind of joy that 4s have the capacity to tap into, having been through the ringer and coming out the other side and knowing the value of of happiness in a deeper way. So I just threw a lot at you. Anything that you want to throw back from this idea of joy and the spiritual journey to type 7?
Thinking of 2 things, and the first thing I can think of is when I started to come out of my head through the different things that I was working through. I remember for the first time being aware of spring evolving. Before it was winter, and then it was summer, and then I started to notice buds on the trees. And I started to notice when the birds would come out, or when the crickets came. Like, I was just more aware of all the beauty of in the world. And then the other thing I was thinking about, reaching bottom, I think through losses, in the sense of loss of people, or I've become so much more free in terms of not caring so much about what other people think. Being more myself, not being, feeling like everybody's looking at me all the time. Just the sense that life is joy, and we're only here for so long. And, so thank you for that too. Yeah. To listen to that explanation that you gave.
Yes. Well, I'm glad it resonated. And you also just spoke to something that I want to point out just for our listeners, that the heart types are also considered image conscious types, in the sense that they're aware of others' perceptions, and that's perpetually feeding into their own self-understanding. And some of the other type structures just aren't as aware, but the heart types really do desire that connection that Lois had named as one of the core ways that she knew that she was a 4, that deep connection with others. And so the way we get that is by being aware, by allowing others' perceptions to connect to our own sense of self. So it's, you know, two sides of the coin. It can be a source of pain and it can be a source of deep joy and connection. Is there anything more you want to say about any of this conversation, Lois?
So the 4 is also sometimes called the artist. And so that's a great source of joy. And just what Michelle was saying, and I would actually agree with what she said. I hadn't thought about it until you said this, Michelle, but I think as my healing and maturation and integration process has happened, the world just becomes more and more beautiful. It's just like, I see the buds in the trees, I hear the birds. And for me now, it's just all about art. It's just all about the beauty that surrounds us. I mean, it's actually been somewhat enduring for me. I remember a long time ago, it might have been the disc. It was some personality inventory. And I remember going to my husband and saying, see, I have to have aesthetics. I go crazy if I don't have beauty around, because I don't think he believed me. And I was like, no, look, this is my top thing. But it's become even more as I've been on this journey. And now that's just what it's all about. It's about color. It's about how all these beautiful pieces integrate all the time, all beauty all the time.
Thank you. You were reminding me of someone from my past who's a 4 who, after a tragic loss of her best friend, her immediate reaction was to build a koi pond in the backyard so that she could sit and be with beauty. And she said that was the only time she could get out of her head, like you had kind of mentioned, Michelle, and kind of be in the present moment, was to just experience beauty.
For my loss, I definitely gardening and just changing aesthetics. Like I needed beautiful things to look at.
When research initially started coming out about how cell phones are changing our brains, our constant, our ability to constantly both have access to information at our fingertips wherever we're traveling, and also, the screen, how it was affecting our brains, just have that blue light, which if you notice any blue glares in my glasses, it's because it's refracting the blue light. Sleep patterns changing and all this stuff. There was an article that came out, I want to say it was in the New York Times, but it was about how a meditative practice that has proven effective for changing brain patterns back to what they were before phone use was a practice called art staring.
Oh, wow.
But you had to stare at the art, do nothing else but stare at it for 2 to 3 hours. And your brain pattern would begin to switch back to what it looked like before you were in a headspace of being on your phone. Isn't that intriguing, what art, beauty, aesthetic, especially from an extremely talented source, some artwork that's in a museum or whatnot, can do to our changing literally the patterns of our brain, the way we think, and I assume what we feel. Well, I'm going to use this moment to pull back and give a little perspective on what some other 4s have said about themselves. So we can hold it up against all that you have said and see if we can find a little bit more play between those experiences and all that you have to share. So the basic proposition of type 4 is others enjoy the happiness that I've been denied. And again, we can see this connection at this description of envy I was pointing to, of a sense of scarcity internally while there's an external awareness of abundance. So others enjoy the happiness that I've been denied. Basic proposition that helps keep the type 4 in its place. The focus of attention, and in the Enneagram, I just lost the phrase now. Energy follows attention. That's the word I'm looking for. Enneagram energy follows attention. So where your attention is, that's where you're going to put your energy. For the 4, the habitual focus of attention is whatever's best is what is absent. The ideal is what's missing. And what romantics, as Lois mentioned, I think you said the artist, but romantics is another common term for type 4. What the romantics or the artist or the melancholic tell us about themselves, observe about themselves, is that there is a constant longing for the missing ingredient for personal happiness. Their focus is on the best of what's missing or what's distant, maybe. So it feels like it's there, but you just can't reach it. Whatever's the hardest to get. Focus of attention goes there. Whatever's ordinary, the default is that it pales by comparison. Ordinary pales. So I'd love to hear any moments where you've experienced the beauty in the ordinary. I think that's a real
Well, this is the beauty of being married to my darling husband, who's a 6. And the joke in our marriage is that he taught me how to porch set.
Mm.
He's a Southern boy. He doesn't have an accent, but he taught early porch set. And I'm sure I was attracted to him because there was a real anchoring there of my, emotions. And so that's been a wonderful gift throughout my marriage, is just sitting and being still, maybe being in the garden, whatever it might be, and just learning to be quiet, to center down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting. Making me think of my husband was a 5, and his just sense of calm, like talk about the waves just being calm all the time, really helped me too. Yeah, I don't know how to articulate it, but it was a huge gift.
Well, yeah, I'm even hearing, if we play on the metaphor, and anchor in the storm.
Yeah.
Someone that can sort of, you were talking about grounding down, Lois, and
he wasn't affected by my mood swings.
Yeah.
And that was like so refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed me to be me, and I think maybe at the same time grow.
Yeah, beautiful.
I think for me also, so I'm a certified yoga teacher, and as I went through my teacher training, and it took years to do that, but and it goes back to what Michelle was saying about meditating. All of those disciplines helped me so much to just zero in on the moment and appreciate very simple things that were there. I mean, that was also, I think, life-saving to go through that whole process.
That's interesting, because when I started with a practice of yoga probably 6 years ago, and it changed me. Really changed me. Just that being able to integrate all those aspects of yourself in one space. And just as an outlet for emotion. Do you find that, like, it's amazing to me how those physical movements could loosen things everywhere that I didn't know were there. In my mind, in my heart. Yeah.
A question I was just about to ask both of you, and now I'm going to answer my version of it before I ask you, is directly related to this conversation. And I'll preface it with, as an Enneagram 8, there are ways in which is my type structure. There are ways in which 8s can be mistaken for 4s, particularly if an 8 is at a place in their Enneagram journey where the willingness to be vulnerable is now present. And so when I first went into a typing interview, the first teacher to typed me as a type 4. And even as I listen to all of you, I have a lot of similarities, but still very much my motivations come from an 8 type structure. But I was asked once, describe a spiritual experience that you've had. And the first one that came to mind was the first time I ever practiced yoga, like really actually practiced it, like with a teacher, a solid teacher. And in that first session, after we moved through, the flow, that the whole series of the movements that you're meant to move through before you get to shavasana, before your body is still. Just as we were entering that stillness, I remember turning my head, and I had the first time in my life I had the thought, this is what happiness feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about a mind, body, heart integration experience that had just happened while I was going through all of those movements. So meditation, yoga, I mean, these really are amazing practices that all of us can learn from. And again, I'm not surprised we're learning them from the type 4, because this is the work you do so naturally, is to dive deep and ask these kinds of questions about how can I find what I need.
Another thing that we do that occurs to me is that we turn our straw into gold, right? So we take our failures and our losses and our pains, and we use them like like my whole thing is I'm all about redemption. Like my joke is like, okay, I'll watch that movie, but there better be redemption at the end. I don't care how horrible it is getting through it, but there better be some redemption. But that's sort of me too. It's like, what can we redeem out of chaos and destructive stuff? And I've spent much of my professional life, not only in congregations, but serving as a pastoral counselor and as a life and leadership coach. And you could not freak me out. Like there's nothing you could tell me that would rock my world or make me like disgusted or it, because it's like, oh yeah, that's, yeah.
Of course.
And it's just, it's redeeming that. It's like, how does that get redeemed and how do we connect the dots? I think that's something we do well as force.
I think that might be the area and the feeling that sometimes makes me feel so separate from other people sometimes, at least just in the circles that I've been in. Do you know what I mean? Like, just that deep connection to people who are in pain or who have experienced just all that life has to offer that's good and bad. I don't know. Or maybe it's me not being able, feeling like it's not culturally acceptable to talk about it at the same time. So maybe I'm not that special. You know what I mean? I don't know. But that just kind of really came to mind when you were talking about that.
Yeah.
And I feel connected to you guys right now because of that.
Thank you. I feel connected as well. I was just thinking about how one of the kind of colloquial terms in Enneagram circles for the energy that a 4 has in connecting with another, we come and talk about it as juice, like 4s are juicy, life force energy, the allowing just life force to be happening. However it's going to show up, you just bring it. You just want it. You want the juice. And you can drink the hard shot of whiskey, and you can take a bath in the water, like whatever it is that they're going to bring, pour me another. And I love that. I love that 4s are juicy, and that you just want to soak in. You want to soak in all that the other person has to give when you're in that space of receptivity towards somebody. What a gift to be able to be seen and felt and experienced that way. It didn't. I don't want to assume too much, Michelle, but I did see you wipe your eye a little bit when I talked about an experience of happiness. That and I don't know what was going on in you, but I felt like there was connection and empathy, and
it was yoga for me. Like I remember feeling that same experience.
Yeah. And this is getting into the holy idea of the 4, which is these holy ideas in the Enneagram are all about our connection to divine. And our ego structures try to get at this thing we want, this connection to divine so badly, and they foul us up. They've sent us in the wrong direction. But the longing is there for every type.
Yeah.
And fours know something about longing.
Yeah.
So for 4, the holy idea is origin, is the original connection, is I want to go back to that which connects all of us, to that which connects me to my source of all things, so that sense that I have of an inner scarcity is revealed for the lie that it is, that I have remained connected. I have always been connected to all things, always. So that's the holy idea, that when the 4 breaks out of the box of the ego, the reality of the 4's connection to everyone and all things is all of a sudden present and available. Now, if only it could be a perpetual state.
Right.
Yeah. But the awareness of it, the knowledge that it is true becomes accessible. And that's the best we can hope for in this crappy world, right? that our greatest hope, our greatest longing is accessible, and that there is a path that we can move through where we can tap into it, particularly in those times where we really need it. There are 2 other phrases that I want to share that others have said are key about 4s, and we've already touched a little bit on it. But now that we're in this kind of sacred space, I thought I'd bring them up. Now, the one is this deeply felt sense of abandonment that often translates for a 4 into a belief, even if it's a false belief. Well, it is a false belief. Deeply felt abandonment that translates into a belief that I am unlovable. Is there anything that you all want to say about that? About those ideas?
Yes.
It's there.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's all that needs to be said. It's there and you're aware of it.
I don't feel it anymore. I mean, that's not entirely, I mean, in my bad days, I can spiral into self-pity and abandonment and all that. But I just have to say, this is such a remarkable tool. This has helped me so much to say, oh no, that's a lie. Do I always feel connected at that really fundamental level that you're talking about? No, of course not. But I at least know that the disconnect is a lie. I mean, I feel like that's like a step in the right direction.
I think the way I look at it is just abandonment issues that I had growing up, I feel helped me connect more to other people, to be more, I think that's part of what developed my empathy. So while I can still go there, I don't stay as long. And I'm able to see the gifts in it now, which I never could before I started the process of looking at it.
Now, you've given us a side of the coin, the proverbial coin again, where that is not often brought up in conversations about 4s, that the part of the specialness or eliteness that a 4 feels, uniqueness that a 4 feels about the self, can be a point of connection to others. You were talking about the being able to hold whatever they give. Well, you know, people can tell you anything, and that's something that makes you unique, to be able to really do that for someone. But it's often that 4s have talked about how their own unique suffering set them apart from others. And is that just the other side of the coin? Like, is it the awareness that everybody's life is unique? You can connect on the suffering, but that the story is unique? Or is it somehow connected there?
I think for me, when I was younger, I needed somebody to acknowledge my specific suffering and pain. I think that's what it was for me. And once it was acknowledged, I could let it go. So I don't know if it was so much that I thought that my pain was worse than your pain, but I just wanted to be seen. For me.
Yeah.
Agreed, absolutely agreed. I have just felt more like an orphan at times and more like just disconnected. And I'm not going to take all our time to give all the background for that, but just times of feeling like sometimes looking at other people and going, oh, so that's how that works? You know, just this sense of disconnection. But as Michelle says, when you have people who acknowledge that, it doesn't, you don't stay there.
Mm.
Like I notice it when it pops up, it's like, oh, there you are, you little monkey. Okay, but move on.
Yeah.
You know, something I'm just noticing as we're, you know, about an hour into this conversation, just time just flies, is, you know, fours can have this misconception, and perhaps it's inexperienced fours or immature fours maybe, of forcing like the others will hear them, this expression of self, like you will hear me, or maybe it just comes out in moments where the sense of being unseen has been building for so long that it needs to come out. But what I've noticed from this conversation is both of your capacities to clearly, you've pointed to suffering in your own lives, but you have given nuggets from your learning from that. And that is such a move toward one for a four. So I just want to honor both of your capacities to already be doing the very thing that the Enneagram is trying to point you toward, to be able to draw on all of this suffering, abandonment, empathy for the pain of the world that you can so easily tap into, and point us towards some sort of reform, something better that we can draw from those experiences. So I just want to say thank you for that. And this isn't a closing. I just wanted to say thank you. It just kind of erupted from the conversation. You've already clearly learned so much from your journeys and are willing to share, and I'm grateful.
I just remember being in CPE years and years ago in clinical pastoral education and just getting clobbered by my group mates and the director of the program, like, okay, dial it back, just dial back some of those feelings, you know? And then other groups and, you know, other places, like, just thank God for the community that kind of helps round off those sharp edges, right? And just the feedback. I've been blessed that way. I mean, that's where community has been a gift.
Helping us learn ways to share that we can be received.
Holding up mirrors to us and saying, okay, this is, you know, and that's, but then as Michelle was saying, you know, when she was saying with different people just being willing to listen and to acknowledge the pain. I mean, it's been a wonderful communal effort.
Well, I switched gears back a little bit from a promise I made that I didn't fulfill, which was I said that I wanted to ask you about your own spiritual experiences. So I shared mine about yoga. What are some ways that you might point to what spiritual experience has looked like in your life generally, or specific examples? And if it's a connection to love in some way, you know, you can choose that one. But when I say spiritual experience, just what's that like for you as an individual? For what feeds your soul?
Nature feeds my soul.
The koi pond.
The koi pond.
The garden.
Images of trees. I think you have an image of a tree in your home, Adrienne, in your meeting. Let's see.
Definitely nature. I mean, I kind of made a face because I want to explain this. I want to put this in the proper context. It is for me when I'm working with my clients, and I want to be very clear the way I frame that I am not benefiting from them. I am not, it is all about them. But those are always such holy moments. They're so holy. Like sometimes, I remember years ago when I used to listen, I was a chaplain in an alcoholism hospital, and I would listen to Fifth Steps, the confessional steps of everything that people had done wrong during their raging addiction. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven to be with these dear souls who were so vulnerable and so honest and just so dear. It's like, I just, every time I work with a client, I fall in love with humanity and with God, right? And again, I just want to be real careful that I'm not.
I understand.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm not putting myself.
What do you think, Lois, that shows you about who God is? When you're with, like, it's in the context of spiritual experience. What is that? If you play with the texture of that a little bit.
I just go, thank you, God, that you created these people, these beautiful souls who are so courageous and vulnerable and honest and deep. Of course, that's the love of going deep, right? So to have these conversations, like every time, I mean, all my friends are like, yeah, you're in head over heels in love with all your clients. I am, because that's God showing up. That's God's creation.
On the other hand, in therapy, I can remember telling my therapist at one time, just sitting in the waiting room and the multitude of rooms in the area and thinking, this is holy ground. This is church. This is a healing space, and just being overwhelmed by all the stories. I just kept thinking about how many stories have been told in that space, you know, and how much healing has occurred. And then you mentioned something, I was in Al-Anon for a period of time, and I think probably my first major spiritual experience was after my 5th step. That I can't even put it into words. It, like, everything was emptied out, and I felt at one with humanity for the first time, like I belonged.
There, Frederick Buechner, I can't remember which book now, but Good Presbyterian, writes about his experience in Al-Anon, or one. It was a 12-step group.
Keeping Secrets. He wrote it, Keeping Secrets.
It was Keeping Secrets. That's one. Yeah,
where he his daughter's anorexia. Yeah.
Yep, that was it. And where he talks about that first realization of God in himself. And I hear some of that in your capacity to sit and hold someone's story, the light and the dark in someone's story, seeing, these are my words now, filtered through Frederick Buechner, but seeing God in that moment, in someone else's story, and that sense of God within, in the narrative of our lives. Even the chapters we would try to, get removed from the story when it's published.
But see, that's the 4s always going for redemption. Let's look.
But it's not a good redemption story unless you have the dark chapter. You have to have that. Otherwise, why would anybody care about your happy chapter?
You gotta have both.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say, as someone who's not a 4, sitting with you both and just experiencing that, the way you cherish the stories of others and the suffering of others in particular, it makes me think, in terms of connection to God, if you can do that as a person, how much more must God be able to do that? If you can hold someone's horrific sin, darkness, pain, how much more must God be able to do for us? So thank you for being an image of that, reminding us of that. Well, my computer that I have some notes on just plopped out on me over here, so I need to sign back in, and told you I'll just delete this part from the, so now is the time where we would commonly move into some questions from the audience, but as we were joking in some emails, my youngest sister, who's a 4, said this is the super special 4 edition, where with no live audience today, because we had to do some rescheduling and some administrative funkiness on my part. So I'm we won't be taking live questions from the audience, but I do want to invite any of you that do have a question. You can certainly email me through Trinity Cleveland's website, Adrienne Cook, and you can also comment in the YouTube video. So if you do have a question for a 4, I will be taking a look at those, and we'll be happy to reflect on some of those at another time through the course of this study. One of the things in lieu of questions that I thought we could talk a little bit about are any misconceptions that some people have of 4s. And one of them that I heard in this conversation was because the title for a 4 is sometimes the artist, which taps into the 4's ability to take something common or something and make it something fantastic, or to take something ugly and make it beautiful. That's what is meant by the title. But some people think that it means that all 4s are artists. So like, if somebody's, we talked a little bit about in the pre-interview, Lois, about you mentioned some 4s that have committed suicide, that have completed suicide. And I think about some, musicians where that's true. And a lot of people have said, oh, they're probably an Enneagram 4 because of that, because they were an artist and a melancholic. And so I think those are some of maybe the generalizations that we might want to play with. Do any of you have any experience of that kind of a projection on you that you've had to push back, or?
Well, I've had to do it within myself, right? So it's like, well, I'm not painting, or I'm not, it's my appreciation of aesthetics. It is, I keep saying this to my husband, like, how am I artistic? And he goes, like, look at our home, look at how you've decorated, look at how you dress, look at how, but for me, my work is my art. So sermon writing was always my art. And my therapy and my leadership coaching is my art. And it really is art.
Thank you. It's a great answer. Yeah. Any reflections on that, Michelle, or any relation or any related experiences? You don't have to, but.
No, I think when I think of art, I'm not, like, in the traditional sense, a very good artist, but I enjoy creating still, regardless of what it looks like. So sketching, sometimes I do a lot of sketching in my journal if I don't have words, or, going to the art museum and appreciating something about it. I think the other thing, like in terms of melancholy, while I have never felt suicidal, I think that I have felt in those times before I worked on myself, how somebody could get to that point. So I think that's how I relate to that melancholy. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Oh, thank you.
I just thought of something else too, Adrienne, which is the artist's way, which I have taught, in congregations that I serve, or not taught, but organized groups to work through the book. And right. And so like you think of the artist's date, like when I first went through it as a participant myself, one of my artist dates was go to the library and read cookbooks. And that was particularly important because I had little kids and wanted to get away from them. But right. But it's like that book opened up my idea of what art is. And I think, that we can't be so parochial about it. It's like there's so many ways to be artists.
I just found that book, Lois, like a month ago.
It's the best. Oh.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Best. I bet I've done it, like, I can't tell you how many times. And every time I go, oh my gosh, this is awesome. You just keep diving deeper.
I loved how it talked about journaling as meditation, because I had never made that connection before. I mean, it makes sense. It's probably intuitive to think that way, but.
There's a slide that I like to show at the very end of these, which is, can you see all of that? Okay. Which is just a snapshot of the type and kind of gives you a moment to explore someone else's, journal entry on what a 4 looks like. And I just wonder, is there anything here that kind of, that you like or that jumps out at you, or that you want to share? Or maybe it's just an opportunity to be seen.
Deep sea divers. I do feel like we dive deep for the pearls and come back up. And sometimes it makes you feel weird, makes me feel weird, like, why isn't anybody else thinking about this? But then it's like,
I
oh,
have a really hard time with small talk, and sometimes I bring up topics and people are like, I don't know.
Yeah. Can't we chat about how difficult it is to blah, blah, blah? Yeah. Right. I feel you on that one. That's for sure.
But that's our job. You know what? That's why, I mean, when I finally just made peace with it, I was like, okay, you're
Yeah,
a 4, whatever. Just do it. Bring up the pearls.
Well, I'd love to close us in prayer. I've been using prayers from Sandra Smith, who is an MDiv and a life coach in North Carolina, in Asheville, North Carolina. And she has written prayers for every type where she tries to sort of embody that type. And so she has given a different name for God for each of these prayers. And for the type 4, she calls God Weaver of Beauty.
Mm.
So if you will join me in a prayer to the Weaver of Beauty. Weaver of Beauty, thank you for seeking me, for never stopping to seek me. Open me to the intimate connection between us, that I may rest in your grace. Empty me of all the ways I abandon myself to the self-rejections that evoke shame. Soften my comparing mind and the sharp edges of my longing, that I may know gratitude for what I have and for who I am. Guide me in the path of appreciation for the beauty and possibility that surrounds me and that is within me. Sacred source of my life, ground me in my inner calm and remind me of the holy and the beautiful in what feels ordinary to me. Open my eyes and my heart to see your grace-filled touch in all of life. From this seeing, help me to know that there really are no ordinary moments, for every moment of life is sacred and unique. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was lovely.
Wonderful to be with both of you. The ease with which you are vulnerable is an inspiration for this 8. And you have me second guessing. Maybe I'm a 4 because I just felt so connected the whole time. So thank you for that. And you were quite thorough, because as I'm looking through some of the questions I have jotted down that I've tried to make sure were answered by all the types, you all have answered all of them on your own. So your self-reflectiveness is quite apparent. I'm grateful that you would share it with all of us.
Thank you for the invitation.
It was really fun. I said that to you in my email. I said, this is going to be fun.
I'm glad it turned out. The party was real.